Hey everyone, welcome to the Shortwave Radio channel, and this is my honest opinion of what the Eton Elite 750 radio is all about. First, I want to say one thing, is this video is not going to put it in a great light. It's an average radio and nothing more. It might look cool, but it's all that it is, and it's based on facts, listening, comparing, and knowledge, not on emotions. So from now, what I'm going to say is my opinion. If you don't agree, it's fine. You are entitled and allowed to not agree. It's part of life. And I just will say one thing, is that if you want to have fair, honest opinions on radio, this is the place to be. Because pretty much all the videos I've seen from other channels are completely out of whack because they don't understand how to really test a radio, or they don't have the knowledge to really understand and notice certain things that this radio, or certain flaws. That's all I'm going to say. Eton Elite 750. This one is also known as the Tecsun S-2000. Same radio. The Tecsun has an IF out. Why? An IF out will, for example, let you be able to decode DRM if you want. And it is also known as the very original first run on the Grundig name. And of course, it's not a Grundig radio. Whatever brand you got, the Grundig, the Eton, or the Tecsun, is made by Tecsun. Tecsun is the company that makes this receiver. So if you're also going to say, well, you just left Tecsun receivers, I'm actually going to criticize quite a lot a receiver made by Tecsun. So nope. I just state it as I see it and as it is. So first of all, we get to admit this radio is the sexiest thing alive in a radio today. That is, big, sturdy. I gotta say, the controls, the buttons feel quality, and that is a very positive point. Absolutely, there is some form of acceptable quality of construction of the receiver. And there's this little S meter here that makes it even more interesting, because today we don't see S meters with analog S meters with needles anymore on pretty much any radio. Even big ham transceivers tend to have these digital S meters today. This radio is a long wave, medium wave, short wave, FM, and Airband receiver. It actually is continuous, and this doesn't happen very often. Once again, I'll give this as a positive point for the radio, because most receivers have little gaps that could be, depending on the hobby that you actually have, depending on what you want to listen to, could be a problem. And one of the examples is that it starts at 100 kilohertz, way down the long wave range, up to 29,999. And that is continuous. There's no missing gap. There's no missing frequency range. It's really, really interesting for that. So if you, for example, want to listen to Navtex transmissions on 518 kilohertz, this radio is going to get there. There's a lot of portables that unfortunately have this little gap from the long wave to the medium wave range. So this one does not. And of course, it's an SSB receiver also. So that lets you listen to the receiver. Now, what is this receiver all about? Of course, front panel, you've got the different buttons for treble, bass, and volume on the left. You've got the keypad, the band choices here. You've got, of course, timers and memories that you can program in here. You've got, of course, the light and the snooze button, of course, if you use it for waking up. It has a nice display, but it's just look at it. It's like a display, even though it has a few things that we don't see on other radios, like it's going to tell you that you have an internal or external antenna, stuff like that. It's a standard Tecsun receiver display. Looks a lot like pretty much all the other Tecsun receivers in general. You have a line-in that you can use, of course, and this is, of course, pretty cool. You have, of course, the possibility of putting earphones or earbuds. On the right side of the receiver, the buttons that you have, there's an RF gain button. There's a squelch button, for example, for the Airband, it could be useful. And also, there's a BFO at the bottom, which you always keep kind of centered here if you want to tune in. There's also the buttons for attenuators. So this is one thing. There's a sleep button and, of course, the power button with the big red button here. Has a S meter or a signal meter with, of course, analog style needle. And you can keep the display on with the backlight all the time. And the backlight's actually pretty good. On the top, rotatable antenna for long wave and medium wave, which is very nice. It adds to also some interesting, you don't have to turn the radio to focus on signals and stuff like that. Kind of nice. And it has an antenna jack. So if you have an external antenna, you can actually plug it in here. For example, you could plug in your AN200 if you have one of those in here, and that's going to replace this antenna for the long wave, medium wave. But performance isn't too bad with the antenna that's got here. On the right side of the radio, you've got antenna jacks for AM and FM, or shortwave and FM, and you've got a button for to put external internal antennas. You also have standard jacks here that are the standard. If you have just a wire antenna, you can just put the wire antenna in the ground and you can just feed it in here. So this is going to work. On the back, of course, this radio works with D batteries, which is nice and gives really long battery time. You have line outs that are here in RCA jacks, which also can be very useful to make recordings, for example. Here there's a compartment, and that compartment they state as being, you just put what you want in here. There's no official use for it. So if you have maybe earbuds, you could put it there, or a piece of wire or whatever, anything that fits. The reason this exists actually is interesting, because notice that there's a little hole on the bottom right of this. That's because in some markets, like in China, this one has an internal power supply, and actually this is to put the power cord that comes through here to power the radio, which is not the case in North America. We have an external power adapter that plugs in to the power adapter jack right here. So that's a little story behind that. Now it has a carrying handle that is nice, very sturdy at the top. Nice telescopic antenna also, and the quality of construction itself of the physical radio isn't bad, and there is a feel of quality when tuning and playing around with it. Now, let's go to the performance side. The problem with this radio is that the wide bandwidth is way too wide. I mean, this thing is, I measured it at almost close to 20 kilohertz wide. It's totally useless to have a filter that wide. I know some of you like it because in AM and medium wave, if you're listening to your favorite strong broadcast, local broadcast, yeah, it kind of gives a higher fidelity of audio for AM broadcasts. But trust me, that's not the reason this is like this. This is a flaw. They decided that the technical details would have a radio like this unacceptable for $400. There should have been a narrower bandwidth, or at least a middle bandwidth. I would have accepted this wide bandwidth if you gave me a choice with a medium bandwidth and a narrow bandwidth. At least that would have passed the test, and maybe I would have accepted the explanation that this is for high fidelity. It is really not. It's a major flaw of this radio, and this should not be like this for $400. That means when you tune around on shortwave, or if you're really DXing, you're going to have to actually use this radio on the narrow filter. It's really not that great of an option. You can, listen to your favorite shortwave broadcasts with the narrow filter and detune by 2 kilohertz to have a higher pitch in the audio frequencies. But honestly, I play this radio enough, and I mean a lot. This radio was on every evening for 4, 5, and 6 hours, with or without external antenna, tuning all of the signals I like to tune generally. One big flaw where I noticed it is on 5995. Right now, Mali on 5995 is actually getting stronger. And the problem isn't with sensitivity. This radio is sensitive, very sensitive. It's too sensitive. On telescopic, it works great, and that sensitivity works great there. But on an external antenna, like the MLA30, it becomes unusable in many bands that there are any strong stations. And depending on where you live, stations are not all at the same level. You know, I got a guy from California that said, "No, you don't know what you're talking about. This thing doesn't overload." Yeah, because in California, there are no real powerful stations. You hear stations, but I'm on the East Coast. Radio Romania here is booming in. WWCR, WBCQ, WTWW are powerhouses here. A radio that costs $400 needs to be able to cope with that a minimum. In overload, this radio is the worst radio of all the high-end radios, if we call it a high-end radio. My Tecsun H501 and 990, that, like, especially 990, half price of this, a third of the price of this, almost, no, it's half price of this, is resistive. It can actually resist the overload. I even had one night, WWCR was on 5935. I was listening to Voice of Mongolia 5950, WRMI. 5935 was extremely powerful. I was on a narrow filter. I had to put the attenuator and the RF gain down because it was so powerful. And even then, I would at times get a little something out of WWCR coming through for a second or two. The St. Jean ATS 909X2 that I had plugged, it was full RF gain. It did not even interfere or have any problems. And you guys know that my St. Jean ATS 909X2 is not my favorite all-time radio. So just these are, real world examples of why this radio is not worth its price, and it's not a great radio. So I was listening to Mali the other day, and if you want to have a decent audio, you got to detune, because with a narrow filter, it's so muffled that it's not pleasant to listen to. So you detune a little bit. But then you got CRI on 5990 that interferes, and you might have Cube on 6000, and then it becomes a radio that is kind of difficult for any DXing or serious DXing. Yeah, it might be fun and good on a strong station, but a radio is not meant to be used on just, strong stations. I would think that anybody that really likes this radio maybe is just a program listener of either local medium wave stations and some of the most powerful shortwave stations, and is happy with it because of that. For that purpose, I can understand that you can find this radio to be great. The audio is good, powerful, but this isn't a DX machine at all. This is a machine that when you try to tune any signals that is squeezed in between others, it becomes not fun to tune around. I used the tuning dial. This radio doesn't mute when you tune, which is great, but you have to keep it almost always in narrow, so it's not fun to tune. You tune around and it's like there's nothing pleasant about it. And that is my observations based on $400 for something that is so far in performance and in good reception and received from radios that are half the price. I mean, the Tecsun PL330 does a better job at almost anything than this one, except it doesn't have the big audio that this thing has, and it doesn't have the sexiness of a big tabletop receiver. it's not just personal opinion here. It's truly real world testing of a receiver. And go out and look at the real guys, the ones that know what they're talking about, that actually will talk about this radio. They're all going to complain about the same thing that I'm complaining. And I didn't even watch their reviews before I did my own opinion on it. It's just what I'm saying. The rest, I can understand why some of the things that I actually talk about, the flaws, might not be noticed depending on what you are actually listening to. I totally understand that it could be overlooked, and if you don't have the knowledge or the keen the ear to know when it's tuned right or not, it's easy to just think, well, this guy is crazy. There's none of that on my radio, because it's easy to not notice, depending on the level of knowledge you have and how many radios and how much what you tune to also. Like I said, if you tune only the strong signals, or if you tune this only in the medium wave band most of the time, you're not going to notice the flaws that I'm talking about, pretty much. Because for you, this is going to be a great radio. And the sound is great, and it looks cool, and I'm happy. And that's fine. It's like those of you that have it, and that now, because I'm talking about it, are kind of mad. So I'm not attacking you. I'm talking about a radio. And that radio has flaws, and you got to accept that. And you got to accept that I cannot accept $400 is decent to pay for a radio that has these flaws. That's all that I'm saying here. And we got to be fair. Overpriced. The Tecsun version is $280, kind of better, but still, you know what? If I had no radios and I have to buy one, this is not on my list at all, and will never be. I have other radios that will actually come here first. So it's just performance level that I'm talking about, and what I've realized. For the rest, the medium wave, it's nice to have the rotatable antenna. Once again, daytime listening with your local stations, that's great. You can even put it in the wide bandwidth, and it sounds great. Nighttime, lots of stations. You got to really do something to to separate all these stations. You got to put yourself in the narrow again. Makes it a little less pleasant to listen to, but it works, FM performance seems to be kind of nice. With the telescopic, I've had decent performance. It gets my standard beacons, the stations that I actually try all the time, because if you don't get that, I already know you're a crappy FM performer. This one with the telescopic, almost full length, I can listen to WVPS 100 miles away on a 107.9, and a couple of other stations across the border. So it seems decent. Airband, sensitive enough. I've heard the airport automatic terminal information system. I've heard my local airport planes and all of that. Where I have a hard time with Airband is, I think Airband on a shortwave radio of any kind, because I have several that have it, is decent if you listen to a local airport and you know the frequencies and you just punch the frequency in of the tower, for example. That, it does a good job at that. The problem is, if you are serious about Airband on VHF and you want to listen to different things, nothing beats even the cheapest of scanner radios that will scan at a speed that is so much higher than any shortwave radio, and will give you better performance if you put a decent antenna on it. So, for me, Airband on a shortwave radio is really, really something that I don't really look for at all. But I know some of you like that. And especially if you just punch in local frequencies because you want to listen to your, local airport, that's it. For that, it's going to do the job. But it doesn't replace, a high-speed scanner, because even the cheapest scanners do that. But they're made for that, and it's a different kind of receiver. So, performance on long wave seems to be okay. I've heard pretty much all the stations on long wave, the non-directional beacons that I usually hear. It might get a little deaf when I get kind of down to below 300 kilohertz. It seems to lose quickly a lot of its performance. But overall, if you put an external antenna, you're going to get that performance back. It's going to actually pretty good. I haven't had any FM breakthrough on shortwave anywhere in any way that I tested. Once again, overload is a problem. But I did get a little bit of FM station breakthrough on the Airband. So that could happen. But it's not intense, it's a little bit. So it probably is going to be okay in most markets where people are going to buy this radio. If I have to give a score out of 10 of this receiver, my score out of 10 will be about 6. I'm going to give it a passing mark, barely. But it is a radio that if you're a serious DXer and are looking for a portable, this is not for you. If you're a casual listener that listens to medium wave and strong broadcasts, it could do the job, because I think that's where people that are happy with it are joined together, is the type of listening you're going to do with this radio. But this is not a DX machine. Even though it's very sensitive, the filter flaw makes it a difficult choice. And the overload makes it an impossible choice if you're going to DX that weak station in the same band as a very strong, powerful station with an external antenna. So that's my verdict. This is what I think of this radio. It is overpriced. I don't think you should buy it. But I understand the attraction that this radio gets. And no, it is far from being the best radio ever made. Very far from it. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe, give us thumbs up, and hope that you enjoy the videos.